Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. This is the dream team right here. George, how's it going?
Good, man. It's been such a long time since we had like that little kickoff season 6 series of episodes that were spurting out. And then it's been a while. It's nice to have you back on.
Yeah,
Nice to be back on yours.
it's all the same. This episode is a result of you being here in Indianapolis.
Oh, we're getting right into it. Yeah. So there's this, I don't know if it's a joke or some type of reality that spending too much time with me can be a little bit dangerous for people in their lives. Things tend to change. Put it that way.
Well, we pivot. Sometimes the pivots occur too quickly, and sometimes they occur just quickly enough. And so you were here. I think we even did an episode or two when you were here. Or we meant to. We played a lot of board games. We didn't do enough.
We didn't do a whole lot of recording. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we went on a walk. We went on a walk over at Eagle Creek Park. Shout out to water in Indiana that you don't have in Arizona.
That was beautiful.
It was really nice. It was a nice day. We go on a walk at Eagle Creek Park, and we were talking about the future. And I've had some conversations with my partners, Dr. Hunter Smith and Dr. Will, over the last.
I feel like we've got to take a step back. You're kind of like jumping right in. Like we need to lay some groundwork.
Fine.
Okay. Last we heard, can I lay some groundwork and then ask you some questions to sort of like get the foundation laid here? We can't just go straight to this conversation.
You're right. I also have not. I haven't talked a ton about my 3 practices on the podcast.
No. And so we recorded an episode that got taken down.
Yeah.
And that was where multi-practice started for Richard. It was him recording an episode and, them being taken down.
Well, the podcast interfered with my deal. Like my deal had issues at the last minute because of content that was out there on the podcast from previous seasons of content between Hunter and Will and I. And so before the deal closed, the podcast almost blew up the deal. Buying the practices in the first place, it shifted things. And then right after it closed, you and I released an episode of a very candid conversation that you and I had. I did another one between Christine and I, and that caused problems because one of the offices heard us talking about, my visit to the office, and they were worried about their future and all sorts of stuff. And it very quickly became apparent that I have to continue to live my life in silos. There's the Army silo, there's the shared practices silo, and there's the multi-practice GPS Indianapolis silo. And they really can't overlap too much. And it felt really weird. Like it felt weird to have this podcast about practice ownership that I'm not really implementing any of the stuff that we talk about on the podcast, much more than just kind of being a good leader and a good person and trying to do good dentistry. But, in terms of the systems, the growth, the potential, all the stuff that's going on the podcast, I'm not really taking that to the practices because we're trying to change as little as possible and keep costs low and keep overhead low and not shake things up. And also realizing that if I bring those practices on the podcast, there's repercussions to our ongoing operations. And it's not fair to the team members who didn't sign up to be part of a Reality Dental podcast.
And I'll expand on that, because I've had, I talk a lot more about my office and a lot more about my staff, especially on Dental Friends with Benefits. I talk about them even more. I even call them out by name. And, my staff knows that we have a policy that if I say anything that offends you, then you reach out to me and we handle it. I don't take it down. I never take it back, but we handle it. And so like an example that I can think of is I was on I forgot where I said this, but I said hygienists are plug and play.
Yeah.
As in it is the easiest position in an office to hire. And my hygienist heard that. And I got a text in the morning, the day that episode came out. And it says, "I am not plug and play!" ! From my longest standing hygienist. Yeah. And it was funny, obviously. I laughed. And then I got in the office and I was talking to her about why I said that. And while she's still valuable to me, her position of all of them to hire, tends to be the easiest because of the training that goes involved into being a hygienist. And so I just explained what I was trying to say, and I apologize if I made her feel not valuable. I told her I'm not trying to replace her, but at the same time, it is, of all the positions, just the one that they come with the most training. They're the most plug and play. I mean, it's
they have the most straightforward job of like hygiene can only be so many things.
Yeah, like, they all taught to do the same types of things. They take x-rays, they clean teeth, they talk to patients about treatment. It's kind of the same. And so it's versus like an assistant, there's such a wide variety of skill sets that you can be hiring. So I explained that to my hygienist, and then it was fine. But I have 2 years plus of goodwill built up with her so that I can say something like that, and it can be taken one way that isn't, the wrong way. They trust me. Right. And if you're just buying offices, you don't have that trust yet.
No.
So that's sort of what happened.
That's exactly what happened. And I instantly became, because pre-close, I was like, I'm not going to be like Mark Costas and never talk about operations inside individual practices, or like, I don't know. I was just like, I'm going to be super transparent, and all of a sudden, I find myself on the other side. I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, you share too much on air, it can affect ongoing operations.
Yes.
And the bigger you get, the more damaging almost that can be.
And the more ongoing operations you have.
Right. And the more rippling that can occur, because it's a bigger, there's more people, there's a bigger circle, that people can take things different ways. So I had both good experiences, learning experiences, painful experiences, fires to put out, drama. I had this vision, in dental school, realized I didn't love fillings and crowns, and said I would love to do this 2-year Army residency and someday own 2 to 3 practices where I can do the specialty work between them. That was my D4 vision. And didn't expect to be fulfilling all of that while I was still in the Army.
That's a record. Buying 3 practices in the military. I want to hear about somebody doing that. I will be very impressed. Our own Richard Lowe is the only one that I know of that's pulled off that feat. 3.
There was an investigation launched. I won't go into that until I'm out of the Army, but I got investigated. I got called by Army attorneys. Everything was cleared. We were good. There were some panic moments. But that's what I thought I wanted. And I kind of had this up in my head as like the thing, this would be really cool. Own 3 practices. It's like you're the coach for those 3 practices, but you're also the owner. And you can like take them and improve them and work on them. And then you can also do all that specialty work that's, being referred out. Some things I learned really quickly about adding specialty work to very bread and butter GP practices is that between the equipment, the supplies, the scheduling, the treatment planning, the case acceptance, the workflow, every time you add a new procedure, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And then to repeat that at multiple offices, you're like, oh crap. And now I need this equipment and this and this and this. Do I haul them back and forth between the offices? That's one solution. Do I, get multiple sets of these? Do I get multiple microscopes? Do I get, and eventually, sure, you do. And that's fine. You can do that. But having a highly trained, efficient team on that procedure at each office, like, the difference between an assistant who does endo as an endo assistant and a normal assistant doing endo is night and day. And I've worked with both. I've worked with endo assistants in the Army, and I've worked with the former endo assistants in private practice, and they are fast. They make you faster. And then I've worked with normal assistants, and they slow you down, and they don't know where stuff is. And so trying to be that like pseudo specialist across multiple offices, all of a sudden I realized there's a lot of problems with that I didn't initially anticipate.
One thing I want to paint is the distance from your house. I feel like you're painting a little bit of an inaccurate picture here. So okay. The 3 practices.
3 practices.
Yeah. So one of them, the one that's close by, how far is that one?
5 minutes.
Okay. So far, so good.
Next
the
one. The
second closest one, how far is it?
An hour.
And the third closest one, how far is it?
Hour and 40 minutes. and not in the same direction as the hour one. There's no scale of like, hey, if I get a cone beam at 1, then I can just refer patients over to take that cone beam. When you got to go in for a team meeting, or it's a haul. It's these are very distant, separate operations.
Yeah.
Very different hiring markets. I think staff turnover. I've learned that staff turnover in a major metro can be hard. Staff turnover in a rural area is extremely difficult because there's just so much smaller of a pool of potential applicants and qualified applicants, and like sometimes you get someone in there and you're like, I'm just so happy to have a body in there. The SprintRay Pro 3D printing ecosystem gives you the tools to make all sorts of treatment appliances right in your office. You can use it to make clear aligners, occlusal guards, full arch surgical guides, dentures, and much more without the long wait times and fees of traditional labs. In-office manufacturing with 3D printing is efficient and easy, so you can rapidly train your staff on how to handle the daily operations. Whether you design the treatments yourself or you outsource to a digital collaborator, printing gives you the speed to offer highly personalized treatments to your patients without the long lead times associated with traditional labs. SprintRay has a catalog of e-courses that are taught by doctors for doctors to help you understand how to most effectively leverage 3D printing in your office. Their live webinar courses are also CE certified, helping you stay on top of the latest digital dental technology. With SprintRay as your 3D printing partner, you'll have access to all the resources you need to succeed. SprintRay has done something pretty awesome for Shared Practices listeners. If you go to sprintray.com/SP, they've put together a bundle where if you order the SprintRay Pro, which is the printer that I have and use now, you'll get 2 free bottles of resin that go with that. So once again, go to sprintray.com/SP.
So I don't want to, I'm going to cut you off, and I'm going to go back to the subject of the episode. So now you bought the 3 practices. You've learned that the traveling specialist thing wasn't for you.
Sure.
You have some challenges with them, and talk a little bit about, because I think one of the big pieces here, and I understand the situation well, so it's okay if I'm going to kind of guide it a little bit. Talk a little bit about, I guess the first time you felt like maybe there were some differing visions or conflicts, or, I guess the, things that you might want to have done with the practice that you couldn't do, or, kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of stuff. Like, I saw what you had done in your practice with supply management with Zen Supplies.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, man, that'd be really cool to do that. And it would keep our overhead down. It'd kind of create this system. We could centralize stuff, make it more streamlined for our assistant. At the end of the day, controlling cost on supplies is kind of a lower yield activity within a practice, but it's something you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some pushback there of like, no, let's just do a spreadsheet. And the hard part is when you've got 16 practices.
So Richard is referring to his 2 partners. That
2 partners,
yeah,
have 13 practices elsewhere. We've got these 3 in Indianapolis. Keeping things the same is often in the best interest, even if it's not optimal. And introducing change is painful when you're not the on-site owner. So it's like you're trying to change a system. So I'm coming in, I'm like, well, what if we hired Apex Payment Solutions, Zach Allman, or what if we did Zen Supplies? I'm kind of like, I'm the guy with all the ideas from the podcast, and it's kind of this constant like, well, no, we use this supplier, we use this thing, we do this. And on top of that, philosophically, kind of big picture, the model here is growing via acquisitions. It's find good, healthy practices, buy them, change very little, and then do it again, rinse and repeat. That's the model. The versus growing an individual practice and maximizing an individual practice, which for me is a lot of fun. The hard part about scaling and growing by adding more practices is you then have that many more teams, and there's that much more drama, and there's that much more turnover, and there's that much more just human experience of, sometimes it's not perfect and there's conflict. And I realized that that sounds awful to me. Like adding the fourth or the fifth practice in Indianapolis was something I was not excited about. Um, and some of it was what we talked about before with you, kind of having some new different problems when you're only there half a day a week, and every time you go in, it's all problems. That's what it felt like a lot of times. It's like whenever I was there, it was like, oh, hey, Dr. Lowe, now you're here. We have all these questions and these issues and these problems. And so it's not that these offices had that many problems on a daily basis, but when you're here, they all get condensed and brought up. And so the experience of being there is very stressful. And maybe it's that I didn't have a thick skin yet. Like maybe I just needed COVID to toughen me up, which it did. Like after that, like a lot of stuff was like, this is not a big deal. Like
we just had COVID.
Yeah, like this is gonna be fine. Like this is okay. Um, but I realized that I wasn't excited to grow in that direction. I wasn't excited to add more practices. But I did want to try and grow individual practices, which includes marketing, buying cone beams, buying, spending and expanding and hiring new team members, all of which make your practice unprofitable for a period of time, with an eventual payout. So, and they told me right up front, they told me at the very beginning, my partner said, marketing and growing practices is not our strong suit. We grow through acquisitions, and they were open to ideas and certain components of it, but they also aren't going to throw money at a practice to kind of grow a practice that's more or less at capacity for what it is right now. To take a practice from a single doctor to a 2-doctor practice is a painful transition.
Oh yeah.
And so they'd much rather keep a profitable, healthy single doctor practice, a profitable, healthy single doctor practice. So philosophically, growing and maximizing existing practices versus growing via acquisitions, I just wasn't excited about that. I didn't expect that. I thought I would like to continue to scale. I thought I would be on board with that, and I wasn't.
And I think one thing I'll say is, before we talk a little bit more about the exit, obviously, if you guys haven't, if you can't tell the tone of this episode, there is an ending of Richard's relationship with these 3 practices that we'll talk about later. But one thing I'll say is, having been on Richard's side of this and hearing about it, you have great partners. Hunter and Will are great people. They run a great business, and at the end of the day, I would really chalk up what wasn't working up to a difference in vision. Right. And, I think you wanted to use the practices like we use practices as our play box. It's a sandbox where we go in and we play with our toys, and we get to try new things and we get to express ourselves through practice ownership. And that's not always the most logically, financially sound way of running a practice. And for us, we don't super care because we know it'll work long term. And, but there's just a difference in vision, right? You can't run, a group of practices, for fun, like we would like to run 1, 2, or 3 that we owned ourselves. And so I think that realization was made, and, they're great partners. And I think they said, look, at the end of the day, we just want what's best for everyone. And so then the discussion came to some separation of partnership. And, I don't know how much I don't think we get super into terms here.
Oh.
But there was essentially the idea that you would then assume full ownership of the 3 practices. I think that was. Yeah, can we talk about that?
Yeah, we explored all options. We explored, what does this look like if I carve out a piece of this, or if I take them all, or could we add practices differently, or the percentage. We went through. I mean, during COVID for the last 5 months. A number of different, like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And to what you just said, I've phenomenal partners. These are great offices with great team members, great doctors. And that's what makes all of this really hard, is that I'm working with good people all the way up and down. And I've learned so much and grown. But I also think that the good partners part, there was a moment in all of this where there was like a do I lawyer up? Like, do I, and I talked with my lawyer, and he wanted to like put everything through him. And not in a, that's like, I'm a lawyer, so that's how I get paid. It was like he was trying to look out for my best interest. And I'm really glad that I didn't. And maybe that's the wrong advice for some people in certain situations. But for me, in my situation, it was, I I really respect and trust these guys. I want to find what's best for them and what's best for me. And it allowed us to kind of explore for a period of 3-4 months of what's the right solution, what's the right direction. And for a while that was, maybe I could buy them out completely. And there was certain terms to that, and it was going to be, it's expensive. There's three dental practices, and lending is a little tight right now. Banks don't love to lend on a very large group like this to a sole owner, and in some ways it was reasonable to try and get financing. In other ways it was a lot of partner parties that weren't interested in the deal. And so is that the groundwork? Have we laid the groundwork?
I think we've laid the groundwork. The only thing I want to add is, so the part of the buyout was such that buying the 3 offices, while potentially bankable, would require that Richard pay above market value for the 3.
Right.
Which essentially means if you're paying above market value for an office, that means you really can't sell it. You have to own it, either grow it to then have the debt justify the, but that's really your only option. Grow it or hold it for a long time until your debt's less on the practice. And that was my concern with this deal. Looking into it, was you're really marrying yourself to these 3 practices long term, when 2 of them are in locations that are very difficult for you to get to.
And I want to double down on what you were saying about above market value, and to clarify, above market value if these were individual practices.
Yes.
So if you were to take any one of these practices, what would someone be willing to pay for as another dentist buying it, and then add all that up? We paid above, if you go by that definition, we paid above market value the first time when we bought them.
Yes.
In the first place. But as an organization, as 3 practices, they're worth more. And then as 3 practices part of a larger group of 16, they're worth even more. So it might have been market value in terms of like what it would cost them to let go of them, but it was not market value of what would an individual buyer pay for one of these.
If we clarified it, so Hunter and Will, they owned, the half of these 3 or whatever the equity percentage was. And for them, letting go at the rate that had been discussed would have been a discount compared to their true valuation of their whole company with those 3.
Right.
But for Richard owning these 3, his options of getting rid of them are such that he can't get rid of them for the same price he would have acquired his, the amount of debt he would have had on the whole organization. So he can't get rid of 1 practice. He can't get rid of 2 and keep, the one close to his house. He can't do anything at that point because of how much debt was on the whole thing. Yeah, he was stuck. Stuck with the 3. The only play was to either keep the 3 and grow them individually, or add more.
Yeah. And once again, I'd kind of come to the realization that I don't love multi-practice. And here I am as a multi-practice owner. And so, went down this pathway of waiting and trying to get financing and trying to move forward with things. And George came and hung out in Indianapolis. Yep. And we went for a walk.
I think we're good for the walk now. Yes.
Finally, you're ready to tell the
20
story.
minutes later.
Sorry. And cut right to the chase there. And the thought came up of like, well, like, what if I can't get financing? What if this is not going to work out? Maybe the play is to walk away just completely, just try and hit the reset button. And that puts my partners in a little bit of a bind, because their model is to buy practices with an on-site partner. It's like a clinical partner, and then they're like the business partner. And all of a sudden I would be leaving them with 3 practices in a market where they don't have an on-site clinical partner. That's who I was. So in some ways, like I'm not upholding my end of the deal to do that. Um, and so I wanted to make sure that this was also worth it for them. So I wasn't asking for like a buyout or anything like that. It was like a true walk away. Like, here you go, have these practices, 100%. Um, and they would refinance me off the debt, and so clean slate. And they were agreeable to this, and you and I had the conversation, and it was like it went from, well, if I can't get the financing, maybe I should go this direction, to all of a sudden it was, maybe this is the play anyways, even if you could get the financing. Which is, it's weird and hard and sucks in a lot of ways because of the good people that I'm working with at these offices individually, as partners with Hunter and Will, and kind of the direction I've been going in and leading up to and thinking about, and like, this is where it's all been headed, to then just say, crap, I really don't want to keep going down this road. How do I get off it? And this was potentially the best way to get off.
And I think if I'm listening to this, the one thing that I'd like to emphasize is, you put down the potential to make a sizable amount of money. Like, you don't joke at, what was potentially available for Richard financially by staying in this for as long as he was planning on staying in this, and put that down just because you're not happy, was a move that I was super proud of. Like, to acknowledge that I did something, it wasn't right for me, and I'm going to leave behind something I had worked to gain to go do something and figure out what's right for me, is an act of courage and trust in yourself, and starting over in a lot of ways that, looking at him as my partner, I was really, really proud of. And I think, part of my involvement here was, I think, helping him realize that buying the 3 at the purchase price that had been discussed really marries you to all of them. And I think, entertaining the idea with him that it wouldn't be that bad if he just walked away.
Yeah. Thank you. No, thank you for saying that. And thank you for, helping me see that. And it was something that was like, I kind of didn't want to look at it for a minute, as you brought it up, and I'm like,
I brought it up, right? I brought up the idea of it.
Well, no, I told you, I said, I'm thinking about, if I can't get, I said, if I can't get the financing, I'm thinking about walking away. And you came back with, I think that's the play anyways.
Yeah.
Of even if you can't get financing.
And this was a long walk of, yeah, I think, but think about it from like, and I think, I don't know about you, Richard, but the fact that we have this show is almost like the multiplier. It highlights all the things that you're insecure about and that you don't like. And like, you're like, I went from 3 to 0. Like, that's, obviously a few steps back, and to have to talk about it is like even worse.
Yeah.
So, I think that was a lot of stuff we had to talk through, is like that it's okay.
And ironically, by that point, like, there was no more sex appeal in being a multi-practice owner for me. Like it sounds so cool. Like, oh yeah, like I'm a partner, or I own 3 practices, or I, whatever. But the reality of it was that, like, this doesn't really make me happy, and this is pretty stressful, and I want to do things differently, and I want to be able to express myself. I want to be able to have control. I want to be able to make mistakes and invest money in things that don't go well. Like, I want to be able to break my office and change stuff and learn from my mistakes, and use practice ownership as a vehicle to teach others. I want to be able to do what you've done over the last 2 years of making all the mistakes in your office and learning all along the way, so that you can help others avoid those mistakes and do the things that you did really, really well. And it was a realization of, it felt good. Like, as soon as we made the decision, like, I didn't want to make the decision. As soon as we made the decision, it felt really good. And so today, at lunch, I told my team at the office that's closest to me, which is the office where I practice the most.
And I'll say, before you say this, So I went into Richard's office that was closest to him, and I had lunch with his team.
That day, the same day we had this dumb. No, the day
It was the day after.
The day after. Oh.
Yeah, and Richard, this is the hardest part for him, was saying bye to that office, because of the people that he had gotten to know there and connect with. And it was really cool because I can tell. I mean, I haven't walked in a lot of offices, but I can tell when culture is there and people are happy. And it was a really cool team. It's a really great team. It's a really cool culture. They're really fun. And, they poke fun at Richard in the same ways I do. And, it was really cool to see. And I told him afterwards, I'm like, look, like, your leadership style works, like evidenced by the day I had with your team. So to add to this whole thing is, I got to see that, and it was like, ugh, it's harder to leave that. So anyway, I'll let you pick up from lunch today.
Yeah. So today I had to break the news to the team, and it was really hard. And some of them were they were happy for me in a way of like, you know what, we can see that this will be good for you, and this is what's going to make you happy and allow you to grow and learn and do all the things you want to do. So some of them got there pretty quickly. Some of them were mad at me in the meantime. We got there by the end of it. And by the end of it, everyone was making fun of me, and we were having a good time by the end of lunch and by the end of the day. And it, like I said, that team at Bolt is just good people, and it's been a lot of fun. And there was a lot of like, oh, so when you get out of the Army, then there was a lot of like looking forward to being able to be more involved and being more present there and doing more together. So there was like a lot of kind of anticipation together, and they were, counting down the days like me till I got out of the Army and could do more dentistry again, be a dentist, which is not something that all of us in this room or on this call like are excited about, but that's okay.
There's only one other person here.
Yeah. But for me, I still want to be a dentist. Like, and I think between COVID and these practices, like, multi-practice is a great way to step away from dentistry chairside. So between COVID and not doing a lot of dentistry and having a lot of free time and being in a situation where in a year or two, I could be, zero chairside if I wanted to. That was very much on the table and very, still make a good living and be involved in dentistry, but not have to do any dentistry. I realized that that's not what I want. I actually like being a dentist, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy about that. So that was a good realization to have.
Yeah, and obviously, right, I had the opposite realization. The less I was around dentistry doing it myself clinically, the less I wanted it. So totally different. But I think one of the things I'd pick up listening to this is that, first of all, you're not going to know how you like something until you try it. As much as we try to think of all these great ideas and all the things, we're never going to know until we do. And that doesn't mean don't do or hesitate. That means do and be open to whatever your experience or reaction of it is. And the other thing is that getting out of dentistry isn't the all end all be all like thing. I mean, look at Richard. Like, he had out and now he wants in. So I think I like that. One thing I'll say about us is we're pretty diverse. And I like that we have these contrasting views as part of our team, because I think we can agree on a lot of things, but I think we're just different.
Totally. And I love that. And I'm excited to like champion clinical dentistry for shared practices, because you and Matt are over it.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it felt really good today, like to finally be out in the open about my intentions and where things are going. Even though it was a hard conversation, I feel a lot of peace about the decision that I've made, and the direction that I'm going, and what I'm excited about next. And it's exciting. Like I didn't feel this previously. I didn't feel this peace. I didn't feel this excitement. I didn't feel this sense of like, like I said, just excitement. So it's a good sign.
Yeah, I've been. If you told me I had to say goodbye to my team, that would be, and I know today wasn't your last day, but like the idea of saying goodbye to teams, whew,
Yeah.
man, I think that's the one thing about practice ownership that surprised me the most is how much you fall in love with the people you work with.
Yeah.
It's just, oh man, you get attached.
Yeah. That's like, other than talking with patients and having a good patient experience, talking with my team is like the thing that I like the most. It's
Yeah,
like,
it's number one for me too.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
team then patients.
yeah, you just like have lunch and hang out, and it's great.
Yeah, I think it's we did happy 2 hours tonight, so I'm coming off of like a fun time with them. But like, yeah, in general, it's just
Oh, did you do your happy hour thing tonight?
yeah, it was tonight.
Really? Was this the first one or the second one?
Like
Third one?
third or fourth, maybe. I don't
Oh,
know.
dang.
I've been doing them for a while now.
I remember when it was talked about, but I haven't
Happy
heard.
2 hours.
Yeah, how's the happy 2 hours going?
Great. Yeah. No, it's funny. So I guess I'll Richard, is there anything you want to add about your thing?
Um, just that I feel like multi-practice has been held up for a period of time as like this cool standard, and I love examples and stories where people decide, you know what, that's cool, not for me. And I've had a number of these conversations recently, including an Indianapolis dentist that went from 5 down to 2, and he's getting rid of those as well, and trying some different things. I just had a conversation with Matthew Standrich. He had 2, and he went back down to 1, and that's okay. And I don't want, and I think we do the same thing with practice ownership and associate dentists. Like I think sometimes we over hype ownership and people feel like, well, I'm just an associate. Um, and I think single practice ownership and multi-practice ownership, the same thing can kind of happen. Like, well, I just own one practice. I'm not, and I would just want to empower people who do dentistry and find what brings them joy, whatever that looks like, either an associate, owner of a single practice, owner of a large practice, owner of multi practices. Figure it out and go for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, Richard is our grounder. If you haven't noticed, I think Richard is, the one thing he offers us at shared practices that we really need is a healthy dose of
Reality.
reality and skepticism and grounding.
Yeah.
But all that being said, I think it's we push through it well.
Sometimes the grounding doesn't work, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but so for me, it was interesting. So I don't think I've talked about this a whole lot, but yeah. So I'll go back to that difficult conversation that you had with your team, and I'll kind of start my story there, where I had a very difficult conversation with my team because we had COVID, and COVID was this period of time where I just got to sit there and do nothing, and I only went in on Wednesday afternoons to do some crown seats emergencies, stuff like that, and I loved it. I was like, oh man, this is so for me. And then my team, kind of like they were telling you, like when you get out of the army, they're like, oh, okay, when you like start when we get busier, you'll come back more and more. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, no. And so I hired a full-time dentist, and in August, beginning of August, a little over 3 months ago, I went down to a half day a week. So I went down from Wednesdays from 1 to 4, and at first it was tough. Whew. Like exactly what Richard described. I mean, I went into the office every week. It was problems, and it was like the staff was just waiting for me to get there so that they could dump it. I could problem solve for a week, and it was like they'd make a mess. I'd come in every week and clean it up, and then I'd go leave, and then I'd come back, and it'd be a new mess.
Yeah.
And I was just not enjoying that at all. And for me, I mean, I had personnel issues as well, but I blamed the fact that I had cut back as to why that had happened. But I think I sort of realized that those were just going to happen regardless of whether I was there or not. I was just sort of blaming myself. And then I think the shift for me happened. There was this moment where I realized, I was like, you know what? I hate this.
Mm.
And I was really pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know what? I've got to love this. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. And so then I went and I figured out all the stuff I don't like about this. And the main thing was that I was getting all the problems. And I went back and told my office manager, and I said, if I don't like this, I'm going to sell it. I'm not going to stay here. And I said, I want to start loving this. And so then we switched up roles and responsibilities, and we made sure that my office man, I told her that I would like her to handle a lot of these messes while I'm not here, and then tell me about the messes she cleaned up when I am here, as opposed to leaving the messes for me to clean up.
Mm.
And I also told her, this might sound abrasive, but I told her, don't contact me. As in, like, when I'm not in the office, if you have a question or a concern, don't send me a message. Don't send me a text with a question. Ask yourself, can this wait till Wednesday when I come in? If so, then you wait till Wednesday when I'm in. If this cannot wait till Wednesday, then you do it yourself. And you tell me what you did. And the next time I want you to do something differently, we'll adjust. But I said, I would much rather you make a mistake and use your intuition than to contact me. And so for me, that totally changed the experience of going in for that half day a week, because now when I'm not there, they don't contact me. No one bothers me. And then when I go in, no one has an expectation that I'm going to solve any problems, and I set those expectations very bluntly. And now when we have a missing dentist, no one expects me to go in and be the dentist that day. We are with one dentist. We are down a dentist. And I set these boundaries with my team. And I said, look, and I mean, I probably shouldn't have said this, but I said this to my office manager. I said, look, at this point, anybody can leave and I stay. Like, as in, I have to really enjoy this. I'm the last person to go. And I think I realized that I am super attached to my practice and I have no desire to get rid of it anytime soon. And it has to be an enjoyable experience for me. And so it was crazy because of the last 3 months, I walked into a staff meeting. So we do these things called, off of EOS, like traction. We do departmental meetings. And so I started off very concerned about my culture. And I wanted to make sure that culture remained when I was gone. So I said, I'm going to be there every week during a staff meeting. So I hang out with each staff member, we eat lunch once a month. And then we're going to do happy 2 hours once a month. And I really just threw it all on them. And then what happened was I was like, okay. And as time had passed and things had sort of calmed down, I realized they actually got this.
Mm.
And leaders within the team started forming, and my team leads started stepping up, and my office manager stepped up a lot. And, it was like 3 weeks ago, I walked in and I just couldn't make it to the departmental meeting. And I walked in late, and I walked in and my lead assistant is just killing the meeting. She's like having super productive conversations, writing action items, following our format that we have for them. And I walked in and I was just like looking at these people that I've been with for a while now. I was like, wow, I am so proud of you guys. This is really cool. And it almost felt like that moment, like when you teach your kid how to ride a bike. I've never done that yet, but I hear about it. And you're like unsure if they can ride on their own, but you just let go anyway. And then they don't fall. I feel like for me, that was the last 3 months for me, was watching them not fall. And yes, stuff happens, stuff goes wrong. It's not perfect. I mean, there's a lot of issues always. I mean, you have 17 employees, like stuff's going to happen. Everything Richard said, the amount of drama and all that stuff is all there. But not handling it for me was a major breakthrough. And it was a really cool experience. And I think I realized that I'm immensely happy in this setup. It's incredible.
So here's my take on what you have and the power of this. You have leadership at your office who love it.
Yes.
And they love the culture and they love working for you.
Yes.
And so when you tell them something like,
don't call me.
And if this is what it's going to be, I don't want to be part of it and I'm willing to sell it. Like, that means they're like, okay, we want George as our boss. We don't want another boss. We want the independence. We want this culture. So we're going to handle it. And make that happen. And I think that's an important distinction of some of the power that you have with your office. It comes from both what is there currently and what like they stand to lose. Um, and it's cool that you had that switch and just realize like, okay, if this is going to be how awful it is to run this practice, I'm really not interested in doing that. This has to change so that I can stick around forever.
Yeah.
And
But
they're on board with whatever change we need to make sure that George sticks around forever.
which is probably not the best place to come from with your team.
Right.
But I think it's at this point, like, that was a moment that I was pretty frustrated, and I kind of went off my office manager, which probably shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, like that's the difference that working in a location and then working your way out of it has, because I have a stable team of like 9 people, like 9 of my 17, I would say I have a really good relationship with. They know me well, they trust me. And even though I'm not there, they're still like, they really feel like they work for me. Like, and I think that's the case. Is like, they really feel like they work for me. And so, now I've really changed it where I go in at the end of the departmental meeting. So they get me lunch. So I'll just go in at the end. I'll pick up my lunch. I'll say hi to everyone, and then I'll just go eat lunch and get debrief from my office manager on kind of the things of the week. And now we only have 4 happy 2 hours for the rest of next year. So we've really cut back on a lot of that stuff because I think we've realized that it was more for me than it was for the team.
They're like, I'm so happy.
They're like, yeah, like this is a little bit often to be doing happy 2 hours. Like every month it comes up pretty quick.
You're
So
like,
we did
all right,
quarterly
we'll hang
2
out with
hours.
George again. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have the holiday party, and then we get 2 biannual meetings for the whole team. So that's what we're doing next year. But it's just been an interesting experience. And I think for me, sort of on the opposite level of Richard, I really have enjoyed the freedom, the creativity, and the space that not doing clinical dentistry has allowed for me. And so, it's not for everyone. But I mean, I think for me, it was the right thing.
And I also say, I think I did a residency. I was really excited. I developed this skill set, and then I took a non-clinical role. Like I've been in this weird like limbo of not getting to like do the thing that I've wanted to do. And it's like I want to have a chance, and maybe in 5 years I'm gonna be like, dang it, I should have just scaled and rode off into the sunset, but I didn't. But at this point, that's what I think I want, and maybe I'll be wrong again. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like it's okay to change and move and grow, and I think that's I hope that, like, it's sometimes odd. I got this question recently where it's like, I've heard you on air and you change your mind so much.
You have no idea, folks. That's just the on-air changing.
Yeah, so it's and maybe I'm excessive, obviously. I think that's an easy thing to say. But like there is a level of, I think if there's one thing to learn from us, it's that we would much rather make the difficult change and rip off the Band-Aid and admit that we were wrong and sort of make changes in our lives than to just stick it out in a situation just because we said we would. Or and so I'll miss on the side of maybe a little bit too much of that versus not enough of it personally. But I think everyone has to. I think if I'm listening to this, I'd be thinking, it's okay if I make a decision and then I decide later I want to undo it or redo it or change something about it. That's normal. I think if you stay in the same situation for a super long time without wanting anything different and not feeling like this euphoric feeling of like really happy all the time, not all the time, but like for the most part, that would be odd. I think that'd be more odd.
I agree. And there is always a sense of the grass is greener. Sometimes the grass is actually greener, and sometimes it just feels like it. And it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
Yes.
It's hard to distinguish between those two.
And I will say that the one thing I left with when I went to Indianapolis, the one thing that I did leave with is multi-practice is interesting. I think everyone that takes it on does it in a unique way. And, some ways fit for everyone, some ways don't. Right. And, I think the way that it was done in Indianapolis of growing through acquisitions didn't fit Richard's desire to grow a single office. And yeah.
That's good. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a wrap.
That's
Anything
a
you want
wrap.
to add, Richard?
Just it's okay to change.
Yeah,
That's it.
totally. So now that's me, Matt, Richard, all in the last like 2 or 3 months, major life events discussed on air. That's awesome.
Good. Air our dirty laundry. That's what we do. Okay. Thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the Shared Practices podcast. We will talk with you next time. Thanks, George.